Hi AP Psychology students and welcome back. Today we are continuing our discussion of various psychological disorders and we are focusing on schizophrenia and dissociative disorders today. So this aligns with College Board objectives. Describe the symptoms and possible causes of selected schizophrenic spectrum disorders and describe the symptoms and possible causes of dissociative disorders. The two essential questions we're going to be focusing on are what symptoms distinguish between schizophrenia and dissociative disorders, and then what are the biopsychosocial causes of these disorders. So first we're going to start off by going through the schizophrenic spectrum disorders. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on the disorder of schizophrenia. So this is a mental health condition that's characterized by a really complex set of behaviors that usually present themselves as differences in perception, thinking, and behavior. Schizophrenia means split mind, and so sometimes students confuse this with dissociative identity disorder, multiple personalities, but it is not the same, and it's part of the reason why I included both of them in our conversation today. So the idea is more like it's a kind of like a split from reality, or like a disjointed ability to connect ideas, thoughts, thinking, etc. It can be either experienced as acute, so more short-term, or chronic, long-term, as it presents itself. And then just so you have an idea of how prevalent schizophrenia is in the general population, it impacts about 1% of the global population and about 3.2 million Americans, and men are more likely to be diagnosed than women. So when we talk about schizophrenia, we look at the criteria in two kind of separate ways. So the first way is we look at a set of symptoms called positive symptoms. Now these are not symptoms that are good. They are symptoms that are in addition to normal functioning. So they're symptoms that are present in the person's life that should not be there in quote unquote normal functioning. And then we have negative symptoms. And these are not necessarily symptoms that are bad, right? They are symptoms that represent a decrease in functioning, right? So they're symptoms that they're things that are missing from the person's behavior, perception, reality that should be there. So what are some examples of each of these? For positive symptoms, we have delusions. So delusions are false beliefs that persist despite evidence, right? Two common delusions are persecution, so believing that others are out to get you, plotting against you, trying to attack you, harm you, etc., and grandeur, so believing that you have some sort of special power or importance. Another positive symptom is hallucinations. So these are false sensory experiences. Sometimes people confuse delusions and hallucinations. So delusions are false beliefs. They're false thoughts, and hallucinations are false sensory experiences. You can hallucinate with any of your senses. So you can visually, auditory, taste, smell, touch, any of them, right? However, in schizophrenia, auditory hallucinations are the most common, right? We think of people hearing voices. And these hallucinations are very real to the person who is experiencing them. Another set of positive symptoms is called disorganized thinking or disorganized speech patterns. So this sometimes is classified as word salad, which is where you have like these jumbled up, meaningless word combinations, kind of like if you took a bunch of words from the dictionary that kind of related and then like put them in a salad bowl and mixed them up and then said them, right? And sometimes word salad can be created with loose associations. So if you look at the example that I gave here, like the word pounding, associations might be beating or quarter pound or hamburger, right? Like there's some connection there, but they're not really related. And this is like the sentence that you get. So sometimes it feels like someone has been pounding on my head with a hammer. Ends up being, sometimes it feels and smells like someone has screwed a quarter pound hamburger into my head and arms and legs. And if you shine a headlight inside, it will drill you. So different, right, than the original meaning. And of course, this can make it difficult to maintain a conversation. And then we have disorganized motor behavior. So this is when you have like these unpredictable or inappropriate body movements, and it can make it difficult to do daily tasks. And usually this is kind of recognized as a catatonic state. And a catatonic state can either be like excessive, purposeless movement, or kind of a frozen state, which is sometimes thought of as a stupor, which is the picture that I have right here, where they kind of just become completely frozen and like unresponsive to the world around them. Okay, so now the negative symptoms, right? This is the reduction in functioning. So, like we talked about, it's the presence or the absence of normal behaviors. So, some of the most common, manifestations we see are flat affect, where like basically the person has lack of emotional expression. Every emotion, everything that happens, they all look the same. Reduced speech, lack of motivation, social withdrawal. So, what are some causes of schizophrenia? Psychosocial causes. There can be prenatal virus exposure. So they find that exposure to the flu at different stages of the prenatal environment can increase the chance of schizophrenia. Stress, trauma, poverty they find is a link with schizophrenia, but they don't know if it's like schizophrenia leads to poverty or poverty leads to schizophrenia, but they do know that there's a connection between that particular stressor. And then there's the biological causes. So schizophrenia is highly genetic. It's a much higher risk if you have a family history of it than if you're just kind of in the general population. And if you have a twin that has it, like an identical twin, you're about 50% likely to get it, which is a high percentage, but of course not 100. So you see that there would be environmental causes. And then further biological factors, like looking at maybe brain differences, would be like the dopamine hypothesis. So they believe that people with schizophrenia have too much dopamine in their brain. And then different brain structure or like brain activity balances. So this is an example of a scan where you see the control would kind of be like a quote unquote normal brain, and then the relative of someone who has schizophrenia brain, and then the patient who has schizophrenia. And you can see kind of different patterns of lighting when they're asking and doing the same task, which in this case is like trying to problem solve. So just the brain looks different, and then that may tell us something about what is leading to the disorder. Okay, next we have dissociative disorders. So dissociative disorders are, again, very complicated, and they are kind of have a bunch of different symptoms, but usually what's involved is that they lose their memory and their identity, right? So it has to do with like consciousness, awareness, memory, who you are, what you see, what you feel, kind of that idea. And they are often the result of severe psychological trauma or stress, like prolonged over many, many years starting in childhood. Again, it impacts about 1 to 5% of the global population. Severe dissociative identity disorder, which is also known as multiple personalities in the past, is about 1%, but there's more than just that. And then women are more disproportionately impacted by these disorders than men. So let's talk about dissociative amnesia. So dissociative amnesia is an inability to recall important autobiographical information beyond just ordinary forgetting. There is no brain damage like you would see in anterograde or retrograde amnesia like we learned about in memory. This is just memory failure that solely comes from disassociation. So some sort of stressful trigger. It can be localized or selective. So if a certain traumatic or stressful event happens, you can forget parts of that event or parts of who you were during that event, etc. Or it can just be general amnesia for your entire identity. And sometimes dissociative amnesia comes with something called fugue. So this is where you travel or like kind of wander, right? Like get on a train and end up somewhere. It's connected with the amnesia because you kind of like forget who you are. Sometimes you take on a new identity, a new job, and research that I've read, it kind of like ends suddenly, and people seem confused and like wanting to try to go back to their life. And so, it doesn't always have fugue, but fugue is like the kind of travel or wandering that's associated with dissociative amnesia. And then we have dissociative identity disorder, which is characterized by 2 or more distinct personality states. So this is often where people get schizophrenia and DID confused because they assume that the voices in the head, the hallucinations of someone with schizophrenia, are the same as distinct personalities, and they are not. So in DID, people actually become these personalities. They have ages, names, different races, different personalities, different physical ailments, etc. You can see an example of a client who drew a picture of all of the different personalities that they had created over time to deal with different trauma. And one of the other big symptoms you're looking for is reoccurring gaps in their memory. So they forget about everyday events, personal information, like the story, one of the stories that I read, like the woman didn't remember giving childbirth because it is a different alter or personality who is in charge at that time. Causes of these dissociative disorders. So childhood trauma, severe long-term abuse, neglect, physical, emotional, sexual, or war or natural disasters. And then, there is a connection between the way that this person develops coping mechanisms. So then that could be reinforced through them being having more, feeling more confident and successful, or feeling more able to deal with their life when they mentally and emotionally kind of separate themselves from the trauma. And biologically, we know that there's a genetic connection, because it does, you do have a higher risk slightly if it runs somewhere in your family. And we do know that there are brain and neurotransmitter differences, but they're still being studied. They're not kindly widely accepted yet as these are the brain differences. So that's all for now, AP Psychos. Make sure you can answer these essential questions. And remember that today we talked about schizophrenia, dissociative amnesia, and dissociative identity disorder. Remember, psychology is flippin' awesome.